This is the One Life Podcast, brought to you by One Life Fully Lived, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping you learn how to dream, plan, and live your best life. Let's begin today's show.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the One Life Fully Lived podcast. I want to start by thanking you for tuning in today, making us a part of your day. We got an amazing guest today. She's actually going to be joining us in Philly. I just found out that's her hometown. So she's going to break away from her daily hustle and grind. And when you hear how big that is, you'll be as grateful as we are to be able to share some time with her. And to give you a little backdrop on Jen Groover has been tagged by Success Magazine as the one-woman brand, a creativity and innovation guru, a serial entrepreneur by Entrepreneur Magazine. She's been ranked number 8 by the SAP in the top 51 influencers of human potential. And we're going to be diving into a lot of really conversations around that today, because we are all about living our one life to that ultimate potential. And Jen's name has quickly become synonymous with innovation and entrepreneurship and evolution. And she was recently nominated as a UN delegate to the first ever global accelerator for the Global Entrepreneurs Council. The list goes on and on. I'm going to go ahead and introduce her and welcome her onto the show. Jen Groover, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you've been, you and I were getting a little time before the show started to kind of catch up, and you've been traveling the world and doing all kinds of stuff. And the more I've learned about you and you know, got to kind of study a little bit on all of your accomplishments and all the things that you're doing, from women's empowerment to your actual entrepreneurship and multi-million-dollar brands that you've created, all your speaking that you got going on. There's so much. So why don't you give us a little bit of an idea of how the heck did you get to where you're at today?
Okay, how long is this again?
You're like, how much time do we have?
Well, the abbreviated version is my background. I grew up in a suburb outside of Philadelphia, and I came from a dysfunctional childhood, which I think a lot of high achievers do, to really kind of break their cycle and make sure it's never repeated. My mom actually was a very interesting woman who grew up in Brooklyn, New York, sassy, mouthy, strong-minded woman. Vince Lombardi was like a family friend to them and very influential in her life. And she ran campaigns for politicians. I was door-to-door campaigning at 3 years of age. And so she really taught me this life of activism. She had a TV show with Cablevision, and that show with Cablevision was really about current affairs, and she really used it as a platform, again, of activism and putting politicians into the hot seat of, hey, we voted for you on this. How do we help you? Not just pointing fingers, but like, hey, everybody has to step in together to really accelerate where we are today. She also had a passion for sports, so she had a lot of professional athletes on the show. So at that time period, Mike Schmidt, Pete Rose, Tug McGraw.
Wow.
Steve Carlton. So, that was the lineup at the Phillies, and Ron Jaworski and Vince Papale, and who is a very good family friend of mine today. So what I didn't realize is during that time period, I had to go to a television studio after school pretty much every day, and I hated every minute of it. And I just wanted to be outside eating candy with my friends and playing on swing sets. And I had to be there because, very few women really had careers then, and they weren't really making much money. And so my mom had to drag us everywhere with her to pretty much be able to do what she was doing. And I look back now and I know how formidable that time period was in my life, the seeds that were being planted just in passive listening. And but on the negative side, my dad was a functioning alcoholic. He came from a very poor part of Philadelphia called Chester, and was repeating a cycle where he came from an emotionally unavailable family, and became, when he was as an alcoholic, he was highly abusive emotionally, physically, And I watched my mom being this strong, powerful woman in the outside world to being abused in her own home, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And so that also, I believe, was very formidable in how I view the world. Interestingly enough, I have a brother who is 11 months older than me who had the same exact life experiences, the same kind of time frame, but chose more of a victim path much of his life from it, where I basically looked at it as, this isn't right, and I don't know how to break the cycle, but I'm going to break the cycle. So I caught my dad cheating on my mom when I was in 7th grade, going into 8th grade. And the stress of this whole ordeal basically caused my mom to have a massive stroke a few years later. And at that moment, when I realized what was really happening and the level of stress that it had caused her, I made what I call a sacred contract that I didn't realize I was making, that I was never going to allow someone to control my finances or my happiness. And I guess when we make these subconscious agreements to ourselves, we start to live a trajectory of our life to kind of make that a reality. And it was very subconscious at the time. And then my mom then in college had a massive stroke and lived in a wheelchair for the rest of her life for about 15 years, somewhat of a prisoner to her own body. And so I really decided to live a life where I took responsibility for all of my choices and all of my actions, and was going to create my own way of living according to my terms and not let anyone else's dysfunctionality interrupt that. And so when you have that mindset, becoming an entrepreneur is really the only choice. It's the thought of going to work for somebody and make somebody else really successful by your own and sweat and endeavors and sacrifices was so bizarre to me. So in college, I studied education and psychology. I joke all the time that people that study psychology are really trying to figure out their own dysfunctionality. So, in college, when I was learning psychology, I learned things like positive reinforcement and empathetic communication skills, and realized how I had been raised wasn't necessarily the only way to live, and was learning these tools where I thought, wow, every single person has to be learning this. This is a game changer for everyone. No matter what you want to do for the rest of your life, these principles are game changers. So while I was in college, I also was really passionate about fitness and started a group fitness program at my college. So that was my first entrepreneurial endeavor without realizing I was doing it, just passionate about something and wanted to create a group of people to do it with me. So out of college, I started really my first business. I partnered with somebody who had a personal training business in Wilmington, Delaware. And he needed a group fitness partner. So I brought in this whole group fitness background that I created during college and created the Groove Shop. And that really set me on a course into my entrepreneurial life. As all entrepreneurs, you follow your passion. You don't really know what you're doing, and you're just figuring it out along the way. And, I like to I reflect on time periods in your life that really affect your trajectory, just like, Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his Tipping Point book. There are tipping points throughout your life. And in that fitness industry and my fitness business, my clients were all very successful business people. Many of them, part of the DuPont world. One was Lance Weaver who created MBNA. And so I thank God I wound up in that space, because again, like what happened in the television studio when I was very young came back to me at that time period, because everyone was talking about these journeys of their own life. They were thinking big and broad and powerful, and they were living lifestyles that I really felt was where I wanted to be. And they made it feel possible for me because I was in it with them. And they gave me the vision of what was possible because I was living it with them. And that's where my vision of what was possible really broadened. I'd been also a national level fitness competitor at that time, and wound up meeting Bob Proctor in 1999 and ran up to him at a conference after he's done speaking and said, everything that you just said, I know, and I don't know how I know, but I know it and I need to know more of it. So I wound up signing up for this very intimate mastermind that was called the 3% Club that lasted for 3 years. And he taught me everything that people now refer to as the secret back then. And so again, that broadened me even further in my ability to take control of my own life, my belief systems, my actions, and my vision of what was possible, and my belief systems of what was possible. And so as I continued on my entrepreneurial journey, I realized how much control we have of so many aspects of our thought processes and our beliefs, and also how we treat our bodies so that we can optimize our minds and our emotional states. And so, from that moment, from that time period, I should say, I just went for everything in a big way. Every time I launched a company, it was with the vision of going big or going home. And so, everything I am and do right now, I've created by a mindset of being able to, not because I inherited anything, not because I, had a stable, youthful environment to launch from, but because I saw what was possible in other people and I wanted it for my own life and believed I was worthy of having it. And I think really all success, and when I say success, I mean happiness, waking up every day, intentionally creating your life. That's where, everyone can be. People just have to learn how to think that way and believe that they're worthy of having their life that way, which is what this conference is really about, which is what's really exciting to me, to be able to bring my life experiences and my wisdom to the table to share with other people.
Well, we are super pumped to have you. Let me just start with that. I want to unpack your story a little bit because there was some gold. I'm, writing down all these notes and I'm like, I want to make sure I ask her this. And then you jump on to the next thing. And there's so much that I think we can all relate to in this journey of life, entrepreneurship, whatever you want to call it, self-discovery. And I'm a big believer in nothing happens by accident.
Yep.
And you chose, it's interesting, we talk about these paths, right? And a lot of people choose one path or the other, or sometimes I often wonder is, do they just not know, therefore they're not empowered to choose the right path? Mm-hmm. And you decided to stand up, take a stand, and take control over what path you were going to go down. I'm curious, before we kind of dive into some of these insights and these empowering ahas that you've had along the way, what were some of those initial challenges that you really struggled with before you actually gave yourself permission to take control of your life?
That's a great question. So before I answer that question, I'm going to just tap on something that you had said, where I made a choice to take a stand. And I did that by investing heavily in my personal development. And for anyone listening, you can't just wake up and know what you don't know. You have to invest in yourself in order to do that. And coming into an event like this obviously acknowledges doing that. But it's an ongoing journey and process. I would much rather spend $2,000 on a training than a pair of shoes any day of the week. And we've been brainwashed in our society to fill ourselves with all these materials so we feel better about ourselves. And in the end, we don't. We actually usually feel worse because we think, once I get that car, then I'm going to feel really good. And then you get the car and you're like, well, I really don't feel much different right now. But growth makes you feel incredible every day. It makes you feel alive. And so
yeah, it's almost addicting.
Yes, it is. It's so addicting. And a lot of people forget to do it, or they don't know to do it. But what you said about not knowing what you don't know. I do believe there's a lot of people in this world that just don't know what they don't know, and they've never been exposed to a conversation like this,
Right.
or they've never been exposed to the fact that you can change the course of your life. And they're used to, maybe they grew up in a neighborhood where no one leaves, and no one ever gave them the vision of what's possible. And so I'm sure you would share in this mission that's why we wake up and do what we do every day, because if just one more person can hear for what's possible, we could change the course of somebody's life. But in the work that I do, I know a lot of people believe people are who they are, and I don't agree with that. People are who they are with the limited tools that they have in their toolbox. But people who have more tools in their toolbox can make a way better building, right? You can construct a way better building. So if I only had a hammer and a piece of wood, I'm kind of limited in what I can build. But if I started to increase my toolbox, I could build a lot better things with that wood. And so I believe everyone can continue to transform and evolve and become a better version of themselves every single day. They just have to expose themselves to learning and growing as much as possible. But my limitation, to answer your direct question, was probably my beliefs around money. When I mentioned about my childhood, there was a ton of control and manipulation and fighting around money. And my dad, growing up in Chester, which is a very poor place, he grew up very poor. He had a very scarcity mindset where he never felt like he had enough, and would always try to instill, I guess, appreciation of what we had, but instead it instilled fear of losing what we had, which is a very delicate balance for parents to teach. I have 13-year-old twins, and I constantly am editing how I say things around money, so that I don't create a scarcity mindset for them, but an appreciation at the same time.
Yeah.
So I had to do a ton of work at reprogramming my subconscious mind around money. I still do. Even with the success that I have, it's still an ongoing, our subconscious minds are so powerful. And just when I think I've mastered it, a test comes up where I'm like, man, I haven't fully gotten rid of all of that programming yet. So, that was my biggest barrier, and it's always a work in progress. Just when we think we've uncovered that onion to its completion, we haven't.
So true. And I often think about the subconscious mind. I mean, getting to the root of our programming in many aspects of our life. Let's just say money is just one area of it. You can say relationships, you can say health, your relationship with yourself, spirituality, whatever you want to call it. We've had decades and years of, subconscious programming, where if you look at, I always think of my brain as like a filing cabinet, and I have these archives and archives of filing cabinets and folders in there. And when some experience comes up, and we'll just stick with, the theme of money, this limiting belief around money, or the scarcity mindset around money versus abundance or appreciation, like you were talking, when that comes up, and all of a sudden, my program goes into that filing cabinet, pulls out all of my past programming, and feeds it to me subconsciously, which, then externally plays out in my life. It's not necessarily always the way that we want it to be, unless we are self-aware, like you said, to kind of check yourself and go, okay, wait a second, that's not necessarily me, or it doesn't have to be me. And I also love what you talk about of, we grow into the conversations around us. And I had that one moment myself that kind of allowed me to turn a corner in my own journey. And I think we all have those opportunities and those those conversations or those experiences that give us the ability to choose a different path if we're self-aware enough. And I'm curious, what was one of those conversations that you had? You talked about Bob Proctor, you talked about some other individuals and mastermind groups. What was one that sticks out for you that you look back and go, damn, that conversation led me down a different path?
It's probably going to be very different than what you might expect it to be, but it really was a conversation that changed at least my professional path. So I was very creative growing up, and I wasn't really a good student in the traditional sense of education. And I actually really disagree with the format in which we educate in our general population, not necessarily at Montessori schools or progressive schools. But no one ever taught me the value of creativity. And if we go back to the money conversation, so creativity is your unlimited capital. So cash flows out of the sky to us constantly in the form of creativity. We just have to be able to value it and then execute it, right? So when I met Bob Proctor and then I was in this mastermind group, he brought in this man, Art Linkletter. And Art Linkletter had a private lunch with us. There was maybe 10 of us at this lunch. And Art Linkletter, for those who don't know, created, he was most famous for Kids Say the Darndest Things, but he had done a lot of amazing things. So he's telling us the story about how Walt Disney was one of his good friends, which I thought was cool enough in and of itself to be
right.
Walt. Speaking of you elevate to your conversation.
Yeah, the creative genius.
So when Disneyland first opened, which had been rejected a bazillion times prior to him ever getting it to where it was to open it, Walt Disney asked Art Linkletter to go walk around with him before it opened. So Art did, and he said to him, "Hey, Walt, it would be really a great idea is to get a bunch of, young kids to run around and take pictures of families and set up little tables or stands where they can sell the pictures. So, if in case a family forgets their camera or they're just too busy to capture the moment, you can capture it for them and then sell it." So Walt says, "Wow, that's a great idea." So they shake hands on it and basically decide that Art Linkletter is going to get 15% of all the transactions of all the pictures that are sold in the Disney properties.
Wow.
Right. So I'm hearing this story. I'm like, wait, what? I don't think like this all the time. You turn that, he's passed away now, but as he was telling us the story, he was still collecting, and I'm sure his estate is still collecting royalties on this idea. And by the way, now we can actually think about it too, which is a whole nother layer. Every amusement park in the world
has modeled after that.
Yep, exactly. So that conversation was such a game changer for me because I said to him, "Well, you guys did a handshake. Well, that doesn't happen today. So what do I need to do?" And I have ideas like that. And he said, "Well, you probably have to get the idea trademarked or patented or protected in some way, and then you license it." So after that luncheon, I signed up for this organization called lima.org, which is the licensing industry of, the majority of all licensing deals and transactions are kind of documented through this organization. And I went to a course in Vegas, where they had a conference, and I went to sit all these courses. And in sitting in this course, this one particular course, I met this man who was the CMO of Toys R Us, and ran up to him afterwards the same way I did with Bob Proctor that led me to where I am, at this moment in the story. And I said to him, "What you just said was genius. Like, my mind is blown at the level of business deals that can be done in a way that most people don't even understand. Like, where our ideas have so much ability to be our biggest asset." And so that man became a mentor to me as well. And so that story that Art Linkletter told really opened a floodgate of my value of my creativity and the priority of my creativity, which really led me into a different, I was in the fitness industry at that time, or shortly after that, I've patented my first product, which was this company called Butler Bag. And it became $1 million company in the first year of business. And it became 10 million the second year of business, which both are unheard of for female-owned companies. And it just, once you learn that model, you just can duplicate that model over and over again. And so art really taught me the value of my creativity and ideas in different business models than what traditionally people understand. And then the guy Warren, the old CMO of Toys R Us, taught me how to put it into action, which really has led me to where I am today on a professional stance.
Such a cool conversation. And I think it's so important to highlight this, because basically what I heard there was that we all have an infinite resource within us that can create all the abundance and opportunity in the world that we desire. And there's so many, it's oftentimes people think the only currency of value nowadays, or at least this is really, in my opinion, old thinking, and it's shifting, and there's this new form of consciousness coming in that, money is the only currency. But what you just stated was we have creativity as a currency, like we have relational currency, right? Friendships, relationships. And I know you talk a lot about that as well, in the importance of relationships and how relationships play into the well-being of the individual and the well-being of the external world that they create around them, and all of the opportunities that come in because of that. Share a little bit more on, because we had a kind of a cool conversation and we only scratched the surface on that before we jumped on today, in regards to the importance of relationships or the neglect of relationships and how that can impact you.
Yeah. So before I forget, by the end of this, we were talking about the subconscious mind, and I want to share with everyone at the end. I have discovered in my teaching of human potential my obsession of figuring out how to override the subconscious mind as easily as possible. I have a mind hack, a subconscious mind hack for everybody that I'll share at the end.
Love it.
So I learned, because my childhood was so dysfunctional, I never watched my mom and dad display love to each other. I never saw, intimacy in that sense. And so when I was younger and I first started dating, basic affection was really uncomfortable for me. And I would always date people that were safe and just, it was just very safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I wound up marrying someone who was pretty much the opposite of my dad, which was very intentional. But even though I was in this marriage with this incredible human being, I still was emotionally unavailable in that dynamic of relationships. Not in my friendships, because my friendships had become my family. And I didn't know how to become, at that point, emotionally available. And I would get really frustrated because he would get frustrated with my lack of being emotionally available. And I didn't know how, or if ever, I was going to be able to change that. And so when we decided to get divorced, my mission was to be able to love to a capability that I never knew was possible, and to heal my emotional unavailability, even though I couldn't yet see it, so to speak. I didn't know how to heal it. I just knew that where I wasn't at the capacity in which I knew I could be at. So when we go on a journey with an intention to become a better version of ourselves, the universe gives us many mirrors to teach us and to make us see.
Yep.
We can choose to ignore them. That's free will. A lot of people choose to ignore. We've all seen the people that repeat, stay on the dating thing, but repeat the same cycle with the same person over and over again. So they're just not seeing in that mirror. And so the universe really gives us these opportunities to get to where we want to go. We just have to choose to maybe go through the pain to get there. And so I, ironically, but not so ironic, attracted all these emotionally unavailable people into my life. And I could see the mirror of who I was in this capacity that I could never see or understand or even get to a place where I could reach. And so as I'm going through this divorce, which was the divorce that I thought was I chose. And I thought, because I chose it and I already had children and I already had financial stability, everything was going to be somewhat easy of a transition. It literally was like Pandora's box of things opening up in my life, things that I had ignored from my childhood. And then in dating and attracting these people created all this drama, so much drama that I've never had experienced in my life. And being an introspective person, I'm always trying to, I intentionally, when something's going not right, or when something's not an ideal situation, I say, what am I doing to contribute to this?
Right. What's my DNA in the situation?
Right. What am I supposed to be learning from this? So everything has value. Even if it's uncomfortable or painful, it still has value. So during this time period, even though my career had already been taken off, I saw my career start to really slip, and I couldn't stay focused, and I didn't have the same drive or passion or motivation, because all of my mental capacity and energy was being given to all this drama going on in my life in these relationships. And then, being out more, being single at that time period, socially, opened up to other people that maybe socially were in the same space, but not consciously in the same place. And so I realized this time period that my career was really struggling to stay on par. It definitely wasn't scaling. And it hit me, wow, the health of our relationships is in direct proportion to our success. And no one's talking about this. So we have all this drama going on in our friendships and our family relationships and our marriages or our partnerships. And no one's told us that the number one thing you need to do to be successful is to keep all of your relationships in harmony. Make those your top priority. And then and I always say this to people in my courses, think about when you're in a thriving relationship. Is your career thriving? Of course it is, because you have more energy and mental capacity to thrive. But think about when you're in a dysfunctional relationship. You're all over the place energetically. Your mind's all over the place, having conversations of, arguments that you had or things you should have said or done. And so I really started to focus in on this problem, because we're taught to, if you go to school and you get good grades and you graduate from a great place and then you work really hard, you'll become really successful. And it's complete BS.
Right.
Complete, not like, it's such a backwards way of teaching people how to do everything wrong. And what we should be teaching is, if you learn how to communicate with people and you learn how to become empathetic and learn how to understand and learn how to listen and all these emotional intelligence skill sets, and then you apply your knowledge and turn it into wisdom, then you'll be successful. But you need to first make sure that all of your relationships are in harmony and that you understand your network is your net worth, and your relationships are, like you said, an asset to you, not just in business, but in your own home, and being harmonious within your own inner peace. Because then when you have inner peace, you can thrive. Or, even like, last night with everything that happened in England, it really ruffled my feathers. I was just it's just at that concert with my daughters 2 months ago, and my kids are 13, which is the age of the focus of this. And it really emotionally hit me, but it doesn't mean I can't feel. I need to feel, but we learn how to process faster, and we can process faster when we have a solid foundation of our own inner peace and harmony based on the relationships around us.
So I want to dive into that a little bit. And I'm curious to know more on, because, you hear a lot of people now talking about the difference between IQ and EQ. And many people say EQ is way more influential and important for designing the life that you dream of versus just being book smart. So Can you give me your definition of EQ first, emotional intelligence, before we kind of dive into that whole topic?
Sure. For me, having studied psychology, but then having been exposed to nutrition and physiology and quantum physics and Buddhism and all these other disciplines, my definition might be a little bit different than other people in my field, where theirs is the psychological interpretation. Mine is the holistic interpretation. Emotional intelligence to me is a heightened sense of self-awareness, so that we can understand and process where we are at all moments and what brought us to those moments. And then also a heightened sense of self-awareness of others, so that we can communicate effectively or understand effectively. Doesn't mean We can understand people without even communicating with them. So that and I joke with my students all the time, when you master emotional intelligence in this context, you become a Yoda to your own life and a Jedi to other people's lives.
Ooh, I like that.
Powerful, right? So to me, you can't heighten your emotional intelligence unless you heighten your physiological state on an ongoing basis, right? So I just talked about relationships to you. So I might have really good communication skills, but if I'm hungry or tired, am I going to optimize them? Probably not, right?
Right.
So what a lot of people don't realize is, things like last night, that's out of my control. But how I treat my body and my relationships is in my control. And so in emotional intelligence, we first prioritize, things like prioritizing sleep. Back in my young entrepreneur days, I would think, sleep's for lazy people.
Right. Just grind through it. Grind. You hear people like Gary Vee talking about that all the time, right?
Yeah, which to me, from my background in neuroscience, kills me because, everyone's brain is a little bit different, but everyone's brain needs sleep.
Right. Agreed.
Rejuvenates your brain so that you can think clearly, be creative, be productive and strategic. So, hydrating ourselves to what we eat. Sugar is one of the worst drugs we put in our body all day, every day, and screws up our level of our emotional state, screws up your emotional state almost instantly, to the point where most people don't realize that they become depressed after eating sugar, but they never make the correlation. And so all of those things create a factor into then supporting our emotional state, therefore our emotional intelligence, and our mental state, which is the ability to think things through in this emotional process. So, for emotional intelligence, for me, means that you're almost an observer to what's going on in the world around you, where you can almost stand outside of your body and process yourself, but also process others around you, not take things personally. Nothing has meaning until you give it meaning, and understand that you're giving meaning to everything all day, every day, but that's your choice. And so you can't be a victim to anything in that moment.
I love that. Taking back control through that self-awareness, I think, is key. And like you said, it totally correlates with optimizing human potential and elevating yourself and taking yourself to that next level. And I'm curious, for those that say, okay, you got me, I want to know more about how I can become more emotionally intelligent, where do they start?
Well, I'll be talking about at the conference that we're doing next weekend, so they can learn there. I also do, I post a lot on my Facebook and Instagram, and I do some courses. I don't feel that there's any book yet on the marketplace that talks about it in a comprehensive way. It only really talks about it in a psychological way. So whenever people want to read books about it, I actually tell them to read books about Buddhism, because Buddhism is emotional intelligence at its heightened form. It's mastery of emotional intelligence. So there's a book called The Buddhist Boot Camp. That's a great introductory to it. You can't think emotional intelligence. You have to be emotionally intelligent. You have to live emotionally intelligent. I have a book coming out this fall called The Operator's Manual to Optimal Living, which is what my courses are brought to life in the form of a book, and really bringing in all these disciplines together. Like I said earlier, nutrition, physiology, psychology, spirituality, mostly formed in Buddhism, and neuroscience, and quantum physics all together in an integrated way of like the matrix of who we really are. You can't separate one from the other. Each one affects the other, and most people don't realize that.
Well, I know you got to get running, and I think that's a perfect stopping point, a little cliffhanger to entice people to come and see you live, speaking from stage, connecting with you in person in Philly, June 3rd and 4th. and you are going to rock the house. I have no doubt, especially after our conversation today. I got pages of notes over here. So I'm excited to connect with you as well, Jen. And for those that in the meantime, whether they listen to this coming week or months down the road, if they stumble across this interview and they want to know more about you, they want to follow you, they want to connect with you, what is the best place to do that?
Well, before I tell you that, I'm going to make sure I share. I gave everyone a
Oh, yeah. We got that subconscious mind hack. How could I forget?
Yeah. So this is a shortened version of it, but our brain, our auditory is a huge part of our subconscious mind. And there's different frequencies and things that we listen to that activate our brain differently. So there's what's called binaural beats, BINAURAL, binaural beats. And if you get binaural beats, and when you meditate utilizing binaural beats, you actually increase the development of new neural pathways in your brain. And if you listen to binaural beats while you meditate and you have subconscious programming involved with it, there's a lot you can find online where you can do binaural beats with subconscious programming around weight loss or around, stop smoking or better relationships or increased finances. And you listen to that, it actually, when you're listening, you're meditating, this is actually really the most fun part, you should fall asleep for about 20 minutes. Which is great news for people because they're like, well, every time I meditate, I fall asleep.
You are given permission by Jen Groover if anybody gives you flack for falling asleep when you meditate.
Right. You are now given permission because when you fall asleep, you shut off your conscious mind so that this programming can actually go into your subconscious mind faster. And when it's done, 20, 30 minutes later, you wake up out of it. It's almost like hypnosis.
Right.
So when you do it on a regular basis, you can override the negative, because you're strengthening the new neural pathways in your brain as this new program is happening. You're actually weakening the old programming that you no longer want. And so it's faster way of reprogramming than visualization, affirmations, and all the other traditional things that we've known up until this point. And I learned this through different neuroscience doctors that have created a program for young kids to help them deal with things like ADD, autism, basically different brain imbalances. And my daughter has Lyme disease. So she went through the program because it attacks your brain. And she went through the program as well as my other daughter who doesn't have Lyme disease. And I went through it with them and I learned this for them. And I was like, wait a second, if this can happen for their brains, then what can it do for us for overriding our subconscious minds?
Right.
It was an exciting discovery in this process. So there you have it.
Binaural beats. If you want to carve out new neural pathways in your brain, unlock new parts of your potential, then check this out. I'm going to be checking it out. This is really cool. So thank you so much for sharing that with us before we wrapped up today. And just a reminder, if you want to dream, plan, and live your best life, come check out the One Life Fully Live conference in Philly, June 3rd and 4th. We would love to have you. Jen will be there. We got some amazing speakers, billionaire Jeff Hoffman, Lisa Harris, the list goes on, Neil Godfrey. So we'd love for you to join us there. And before we wrap up, Jen, where can people find Jen, connect with you outside of the One Life community?
I'm most active on social media, Jen Groover on Facebook. It's 2 O's, like groovy with an R. My personal page is more active than my public page. Instagram, I'm very active on, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
Love it. Thanks so much, Jen. We'll look forward to catching up with you soon.
Absolutely. Take care. See you soon.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you haven't already, please be sure to join our Facebook page at the One Life Community, or you can check us out at onelifefullylive.org. There'll be information about upcoming events, podcast guests, and some great tools and resources for you guys on there that you will not want to miss out on. Now go out, make the best of your day, and live your life fully lived.
Don't you take the day for granted. Gotta live